Hey there, the C50 is here. I am super excited about it, as I'm sure many of you out there are as well. Now, first of all, some disclaimers. I do not have my hands on the Canon C50, so please keep that in mind about this video. I haven't used the camera yet, so this is my initial thoughts and reactions to the announcement. So if you're watching this later, just keep in mind this video is recorded within an hour of the official release and announcement of the C50. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Josh, and on this channel I do technical deep dive reviews and tutorials, and I've owned, tested, and used basically every Canon camera in the past 5 years, including many of Canon's cinema cameras. So I have a lot of thoughts about the C50. And basically, the C50 is the camera that I've personally been waiting for over 4 years, and I'm sure a lot of you out there have been as well. Now, the Sony FX3 was announced in February of 2021, and I've owned and used that camera for many years and made a lot of money with that camera, both on YouTube and for client work. And I think a lot of us have always said, Canon, if you could just make an FX3, we'd all probably buy it. And guess what? That's what the C50 basically is. So I'm not gonna go through all the specs here, but the skeptic in me is just looking for the Canon cripple hammer. I know that's what everyone likes to call it, and it's pretty difficult, in my opinion, to see where they really held back with this camera. So let's go through some of the specs, and I have some thoughts and opinions about a lot of this. So first of all, it has a 32 megapixel full frame sensor, which will give us a 7K resolution in video modes, and this will be oversampled when you are recording in 4K. Now, I'm not sure where the line from oversampling to line skipping will be. I guess, and I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, it will oversample up to 4K 60, and maybe above that, it won't be oversampled. It does do a full frame non-cropped 4K 120, but I am not sure if that's oversampled or not. And again, I'm not sure about the 4K 60 as well, but the R5C does do oversampled 4K 60, so I would assume that it would at least do that, but we'll have to see. It also does record internal 7K RAW up to 60 frames per second, and that is Canon's 12-bit RAW. That is a really strong feature in this camera, and it's really cool to have internal RAW recording. One of the highlight features of the C50 is the fact that it will record in OpenGate up to 30 frames per second. So what OpenGate is that it will allow you to record the full 3x2 sensor that's in the camera, and that's, usually cropped top and bottom for 16:9 or 17:9. And I know that if you are shooting on Lumix or Blackmagic or Fuji and some of those other brands that do allow for OpenGate recording, you know how important this is to a lot of people and how advantageous it is in a lot of different situations. If you're unaware of the benefits, of course, you record the full sensor, and this will allow you to shoot in a more creative fashion in some ways. You do have that creative element of shooting in 3x2 if you'd like to do that. Sometimes I like to shoot that way. But of course, it's also good for reframing in post because you have more vertical height. You can crop out for vertically, oriented videos, and you also have the ability to use higher squeeze anamorphic lenses and not crop as much off the sides. And this camera does have some anamorphic support built in as well. Now, there's a new feature in the C50 where you can actually record horizontal and vertical videos to separate files and do that simultaneously. And you can actually shift the vertical framing left and right. I just saw this and it looks really cool. I don't know what the limitations are there in terms of resolutions and codecs and bit rates and those sorts of things, but it looks like a really cool feature if you need 2 video files directly out of camera, both horizontal and vertical. Next up are the base ISOs. The camera does have a dual base system, but the ISOs are 800 and 6400, and that's going to be in C-Log 2. Now, 6400 is higher than I would personally like. I like the second base usually around 3200 or 4000. That's kind of where I like to live, especially when I'm shooting real estate at 3200 or 4000. I can stop the lens down a little bit to get more in focus and still get the advantages of that second base ISO. It'll be curious to see, how clean the second base ISO is at 6400. It should have the same amount of dynamic range at 800 and 6400, but it will be a little bit noisier. So we'll have to see how clean it is. But it is, a stop higher in terms of the exposure than the 3200 that you'll find in cameras like the R5C. Now, in terms of the memory cards, I was really concerned watching the rumors come out over the past few weeks that it was going to have 2 SD cards, but it does have one CF Express B card and one SD card, which is great. I would love 2 CF-Express-Bs, but one is great because it doesn't limit the frame rates and codecs and things like that that you would get in something like the C80. I do think that was a big complaint that most of us have about the C80 is that it has 2 SD cards. Now, SD cards are, have been around for a long time, but frankly, CF-Express-B is where we need to be right now because the cards are a lot faster to unload and they're a lot cheaper per gigabyte than the V90 SD card. So I'm a big fan of CF-Express-B, and I'm glad to see at least one of them in there. And having 2 cards does allow you to do some dual recording in different modes and things like that, or relay record and duplicate mode, like you can record to both cards at the same time in certain codecs and frame rates and those sorts of things. Now, this camera does have C-Log 2, which is awesome to see. It seems like that's what they're doing moving forwards. We're kind of getting away from that limitation of C-Log 3 and C-Log 2, and Canon claims that it has 15 plus stops of dynamic range. So clearly this will have more dynamic range than cameras like the R5C. So a big feature of the C50 is going to be the body design, and this is a very new looking camera from Canon. It does not have an EVF. It is a little bit chunky. It's got a robust cooling system. And of course, it has all sorts of buttons all over the camera and mounting places. And it looks like, any other Canon cinema camera, and you'll be able to customize a lot of those buttons. And another part of the body design is the fact that they're including the XLR top handle, similar to the FX3. And the cool thing about this is I think it has a pretty nice looking design, but it also has controls on the top of the top handle, including run stop and a zoom rocker. So that's pretty cool. Run stop is going to be awesome. The zoom rocker is only going to be handy if you're using a power zoom lens, but it does open up the door for other possibilities with newer lenses potentially coming out in the future or using some of their current offerings. Now, the C50 does not have IBIS, and it does have a digital stabilization. Now, this is a pro or a con depending on what you're doing and which camp you're in. I personally am glad that there is no IBIS in this camera, because when I'm using a video focused camera, a cinema camera, I actually prefer to not have it because I don't get any of those wobbles. I don't have to wait for the IBIS to sort of settle out in some situations. And I'm gonna run this on a gimbal or on a tripod, or if I'm running it handheld, I'm gonna add some rigging, a V-mount, a monitor, and make the camera heavy. And I like the motion that that provides. Also, personally, I own a bunch of Canon RF lenses that have stabilization, and I found in the past on the R5C, the C80, the C70, when I use those lenses like the 15 to 35 and the 24 to 70, when I'm using the optical stabilization of those lenses with the digital stabilization in the Canon cinema cameras, and I put a little bit of weight on the camera, I find it to work really well. Now, the C50 does not have NDs. I don't think anyone was really serious about expecting that in this small camera. And that, of course, is a big difference between the C50 and, its larger siblings like the C70, C80, and C400. Now, this is a hybrid camera, and it does have some pretty awesome photo capabilities as well, although I would definitely call this much more of a video-focused camera than a straight-up hybrid like the R5C was. It does shoot 32 megapixels with 40 frames per second in burst mode, which is a pretty awesome photography camera on its own. Now, it does have these separate menus like in the R5C, and I love this because it really does make this more of a true hybrid camera like the R5C, although I do think that the C50 is definitely more video focused. But in terms of the way the camera operates, when you're in video mode, it acts like a video camera. You're using the cinema operating system, which I strongly prefer over the stills operating system for shooting video. And then when you put into photo mode, it acts just like every other Canon photography camera. Now, of course, I do have some questions about this camera, and the first thing is going to be the battery life. Now, the C50 is going to be using the Canon LPE6P battery, which is the new battery that came out with the R5 Mark II. Now, this battery is the same size as the previous versions of that battery, but when it came out with the R5 II, they also came out with a firmware update a little bit later for the R5C, and it drastically improved the runtimes of that camera by about 50%. I made a video about that, and I'll leave that video linked down below. Now, this camera does not have IBIS, so hopefully that does help with the battery life a little bit, and of course, not having IBIS also helps with the amount of heat that's generated in the camera, so we'll have to see, but probably for long run times, you're definitely going to be plugging this camera in with USB USB power delivery to a V mount or something like that. In terms of dynamic range, I'm guessing that the camera is going to be pretty good. I mean, it does have C-Log 2 in it, and Canon saying 15 plus stops of dynamic range, but I will have to wait and see how good it is and see how the noise performance is. We also do have that 7K oversampled 4K, which always helps with the noise. Anytime you have an oversampled camera or you are recording in high resolution with a project resolution that's lower, that oversampling does help with noise performance. So I bet you it will be pretty clean. Now, in addition to that, like I just mentioned before, the second base ISO and the noise performance, I'll be really curious at 6400 because that's a little bit different than some of the other cameras. I mean, the C80 does have a triple base ISO and the third base is at 12,800. So we'll have to see how that does and what it looks like. In terms of the sensor readout, we'll have to see how that does as well. I bet you it won't be amazing, but it won't be horrible. It'll kind of be in the middle, but again, I'll have to test that out. In terms of overheating, I, of course, will have to test this, but I don't think the camera will overheat. I've never heard of a Canon cinema camera overheating. When they put the C badge on the front and the little red button here, they become very reliable cameras. They don't overheat, and I've found that Canon cinema cameras can be just relied on for lots of situations in any temperature, especially where I live in the humid summer of North Carolina. I haven't had any issues with any of the Canon cinema cameras. All right, let's talk about the FX3 a little bit because I think there's going to be, well, Canon just copied Sony's FX3. Well, yeah, but the reality is the FX3 is an unbelievable camera, and it is 4 years old, and it did take Canon a little while to, you know, come up with their own version of this. But guess what? It showed how strong this camera is and the design of it and how well it's been selling. And I made a long-term review of the FX3, which I'll leave linked down below. And I did call it the most versatile video camera out there. And I think that I still stand by that until the C50 came out, because I think that might be even more versatile with open gate and internal RAW recording, because that form factor, it gets so small. You can use it on a gimbal. You can mount in a lot of places. You can add the top handle and get XLR. You can rig it out because there's screws on it. You could just use it in so many different situations. But of course now, like I said, we have open gate, the 7K internal RAW. We can also crop in 4K because we have a higher resolution, and we don't have that in the FX3, and that's handy in a lot of situations. Now, we don't have IBIS, so for some people that might be a big deal, but like I said earlier, for me personally, I prefer to not have IBIS in this camera. Now let's talk about the name of the camera, the C50. This is technically lower in their lineup than the C70 and the C80. Now, camera manufacturers' nomenclature and naming of cameras doesn't always make sense, but it is lower than the C70 and the C80, and this raises some questions for me as well, mainly about the quality of the sensor and the image in this camera. Of course, I'm gonna have to try it. Everything I've seen so far, in the hour after it released, it does look really strong. But it does seem like Canon prefers a 6K sensor resolution with a lot of their full frame video cameras like the C500 Mark II, the C80, the C400. The C70 and C300 Mark III has that really special Super 35 DGO sensor, and the R5C was just a modified R5, which was a stills camera. So it seems like most of their cameras are 6K, and personally that's my favorite resolution for video cameras right now. You're seeing that across the board in a lot of different manufacturers. 6K is great because we get a little bit more detail. We get that oversampled image, which gives us that extra detail, but also helps with noise performance. We have the ability to crop in post more, and we also, if you're shooting in a Super 35 or crop mode, you can still get 4K. So 6K is kind of the sweet spot. So the fact that this has a 7K sensor makes me think that this new sensor will probably be used in other cameras. And my first guess would be the R6 Mark III. I think having a 32 megapixel sensor in the R6 Mark III makes a lot of sense. And then there is a hybrid camera that can pair along with the C50 with the same sensor. So I do think that that makes sense if they are going that direction. But it's curious to me why it's much lower than the C80, and the fact that it has a lot more capabilities of the C80 other than some of the physical stuff like the ND filters and built-in XLR and SDI and those sorts of things. But it does, you know, raise some questions to me about the sensor. Again, we'll have to see. Let's talk about some of the other Canon cameras briefly. Of course, the R5 II is going to come up in conversation based on the very similar price point. I've said for the longest time the R5 II is a photo camera that does really good video. If you are focused on shooting video, please buy a video focused camera. And so I always recommend the R5C, C70, C80, and I would I haven't used it yet, but I'd probably recommend the C50 over the R5 II if you're heavily focused on video, because the R5 II can definitely overheat in a lot of situations. Now, the R5C has been such a strong camera for so long, and I think a lot of people are thinking that this is the successor of the R5C. It sort of is, and it sort of isn't at the same time. The C50 will have more dynamic range. It'll have better autofocus. It has that really sweet XLR top handle. It has a more, video focused body design, but it does not have an EVF. So to me, it's kind of a different camera. And from everything I've heard, that there won't be an R5C Mark II. So this kind of is the successor to that. But again, it's, I think, more of a video camera than a real hybrid camera. Now, when you compare the C50 with the C80, like I already said, some of the benefits of the C80, of course, the bigger body, bigger battery, you have the built-in XLR, ND filter, SDI, those sorts of things. But the C50 still does have a timecode port, which is really handy in a lot of situations. And I really hope we see some, upgrades with the C80. Maybe we'll get open gate on this at some point, which would be cool. The sensor does appear to be a 3x2 sensor when you look into the camera. So we'll see. But, if you need things like SDI, NDs, built-in XLR, those sorts of things, the C80 is still going to be a great option for you. In terms of the price of this camera, at launch it is $38.99, and that is including the top handle. I do think this is a pretty aggressive and competitive price, given that it is cheaper than the FX3, and I think it does a lot for how much it is. It is not a cheap camera, but it is a professional video camera that gives you a lot of flexibility and versatility, and I do think that Canon is gonna sell quite a few of these. So if you are interested in picking one up, like I said before, there is a link down in the description below. I'd appreciate it if you could check that out if you are looking to pick up the camera. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.